Welcome to the FedRAMP training on the Readiness Assessment Report. This course is divided into 4 main sections in order to familiarize FedRAMP stakeholders with the information necessary to complete a successful Readiness Assessment Report, or RAR. These sections cover the following: context setting for the Readiness Assessment Report, third-party assessment organizations, or 3PAO, required discussions with the cloud service providers, also known as CSPs, preparing a FedRAMP Readiness Assessment Review Report, and Readiness Assessment Review Submission Instructions. At the conclusion of the course, the material covered should support your understanding of the following: how to best utilize the FedRAMP Readiness Assessment Reports, templates, and this guide to obtain optimal results when submitting a final RAR for review to the FedRAMP Program Management Office, or PMO. How to document each RAR section to best highlight the system readiness at the level of rigor that FedRAMP requires. How to increase the likelihood of successfully completing a RAR. How to interpret the RAR's intent, processes, and best practices. And finally, how to interpret the residual risk inherited by an agency for leveraging the system. A CSP should view a RAR as the resume for their cloud service offering. To begin the readiness assessment journey, it is helpful to understand the key players in the process and their respective roles. Let's begin with the Readiness Assessment Report itself. In order to protect government information, operations, and assess against threats, the FedRAMP authorization process requires a high level of documentation and rigor. Since a typical cloud service offering, or CSO, System Security Plan, or SSP, can be a daunting 700 plus pages, FedRAMP suggests that the CSP begin the journey towards full FedRAMP authorization by using the RAR template. This can serve as an honest self-assessment against their own system. The purpose of the RAR is to enable FedRAMP to reach a FedRAMP-ready decision for a specific CSP system based on an organizational process and the technical security capabilities of the system. FedRAMP grants a FedRAMP-ready designation when the information in the RAR template indicates that the CSP is likely to achieve a JAB, PATO, or an agency ATO for the system within 1 year. Once the CSP is reasonably sure that the cloud service offering, or CSO, will be approved via the requirements in the RAR, the CSP should engage with a third-party assessor, or 3PAO, who will perform the readiness assessment. The intent of the assessment is to have a 3PAO attest to a CSP's readiness for the FedRAMP authorization process. There are no shortcuts for the RAR process. The residual risk is either acceptable to FedRAMP or it's unacceptable. A 3PAO should not submit a RAR if they are aware that the CSO is not FedRAMP ready. This type of action threatens a 3PAO's assessment integrity and puts them in performance management review with the FedRAMP PMO. The role of the 3PAO is to fully develop the RAR based on their observations and gathered evidence. While the CSP should review the RAR for accuracy, a 3PAO has ownership of the RAR and is fully responsible for its content. In the RAR, a 3PAO documents and validates a CSP's full implementation of the technical capabilities needed to meet the FedRAMP security requirements. This is by far the biggest hurdle for the CSPs to obtain a FedRAMP authorization. The RAR does require some evidence gathering by a 3PAO, but does not require having 100% of the documentation completed by the CSP. To complete a RAR, the 3PAO should focus on the following. First, confirming full implementation of the CSO's technical capabilities. Second, understanding how a CSO works and operates, not on how that functionality is translated to documentation. Third, validating what is actually implemented within the CSO, not copying and pasting what a CSP has written in the system documentation. Fourth, understanding the key functionalities of the CSO and documenting the RAR in a way that is understandable to customers. Fifth, Verifying the stated authorization boundary of the CSO and the data flows within the system are practical, secure, and logical, given the 3PAO's expertise in cloud implementations. The Readiness Assessment Report also reflects the quality and technical acumen of a 3PAO. A poorly written RAR may impact a 3PAO's FedRAMP recognition status. Let's take a deeper look at the role of the Cloud Service Provider, or CSP. The CSP is responsible for creating and defining an acceptable authorization boundary and data flow diagram. The assessing 3PAO is responsible to ensure the diagrams accurately depict the service offering and truly illustrate all the components as required by the FedRAMP boundary guidance. It is important to note that a CSP will most likely go through several iterations before the 3PAO accepts the diagrams. This is normal, especially for CSPs who are new to FedRAMP. CSPs should provide artifacts and resources to the 3PAO to complete all RAR requirements. CSPs review the RAR for accuracy, but the 3PAO is responsible to report the CSO as it is. A RAR is a snapshot in time of the as-is security posture of the system. CSPs must not use a readiness assessment as their opportunity to determine what the FedRAMP PMO may or may not accept. If a CSO does not fully implement the federal mandates, the CSO will not be accepted as FedRAMP ready. 3PAOs must ensure all comments and feedback provided by the FedRAMP PMO have been addressed before resubmitting updated RARs. If a CSP is having difficulty understanding FedRAMP requirements, it may be advisable for the CSP to hire a consulting 3PAO to assist with creating diagrams and documentation. In order for a 3PAO to remain impartial and independent, the assessing 3PAO cannot also be the consulting 3PAO. Next, we'll talk about the RAR audience. Of course, the RAR audience is key. A RAR is not intended solely for the FedRAMP PMO's review and understanding. A 3PAO should align their RAR towards agency customers that may or may not have a strong technical background. The report should aid agencies in determining if they wish to invest time and funding into a particular cloud service offering. Agency customers must be able to first understand a CSO's RAR to determine if the CSO can be used in their agency's environment, and second, use the RAR to determine the risk level of using the CSO within their agency. Is the agency authorizing official, or AO, able to accept the risk? Finally, based on agency evaluation of the RAR, they can agree to partner with the CSP to pursue a FedRAMP initial authorization. This RAR can serve as the CSP's technical marketing tool to agency customers to enable successful partnership between the CSP and an agency. Now that we have set the foundation for the Readiness Assessment Report and discussed the RAR's intent, key stakeholders' roles and responsibilities, and outlined the RAR's audience, it is important to emphasize the following. The 3PAO has ownership of the RAR and is fully responsible for its content. Therefore, it's important that the 3PAO submit the RAR only if they have fully validated the following. First, that the cloud service offering authorization boundary and data flow diagrams. Second, that the CSP has implemented all federal mandates. And third, that there are no major technical gaps between the CSP's implemented technical controls and FedRAMP requirements. In this next section, we'll take a look at the required discussions that take place between a cloud service provider and their third-party assessment organizations. Before beginning the RAR process, the CSP should be abundantly clear regarding the following. Not all CSPs will pass the Readiness Assessment Review. 3PAOs must maintain independence and impartiality when working with CSPs. Achieving FedRAMP ready status is required for a JAB provisional authority to operate, also known as a PATO. The benefits of becoming FedRAMP ready, and also the 1-year duration of being designated FedRAMP ready. This is what we will discuss in the following slides. CSP should understand that a readiness assessment is a determination of a CSO's readiness to pursue a FedRAMP authorization. This is not a guarantee that CSO will achieve FedRAMP authorizations. It's common that not all CSPs will pass the readiness assessment review each time. Many times, a readiness assessment will find significant gaps in a CSO's technical capabilities, resulting in remediation work for a CSP. CSPs can always download the RAR template for their CSO to make a preliminary determination on their FedRAMP readiness prior to engaging with a 3PAO for the readiness assessment. As mentioned previously, FedRAMP grants a FedRAMP Ready designation only when the information in the RAR indicates that the CSP is likely to achieve a Joint Authorization Board, JAB, Provisional Authorization to Operate, PATO, or an agency ATO for the system. As a reminder, a 3PAO should not submit a RAR to FedRAMP unless they validate that all federal mandates mentioned in the RAR Federal Mandates section are met, and believe a CSO has the necessary security capabilities and functionality to obtain FedRAMP authorization. Throughout the readiness assessment process, a 3PAO is required to remain impartial and independent when working with CSPs. This should be clearly communicated to the CSP. The 3PAO can reference R311 specific requirements for more information, but here we highlight 3 key sections to support this position. First, the R311 states, if a 3PAO is part of an organization that offers consulting services to CSPs, the 3PAO is not permitted to inspect a CSP system that has provided consulting services on within the previous 2 years. It further states that if a 3PAO is part of an organization that is also a CSP, the 3PAO is not permitted to inspect the work of their organization's CSP, and these guidelines are in place to ensure 3PAOs acting on behalf of FedRAMP are impartial to the best extent possible. Finally, the R311 indicates that tools owned or developed by a 3PAO that provide any type of direct service or support to a CSP, including but not limited to creating FedRAMP documentation, are considered a form of consulting. In order to maintain the FedRAMP requirement for 3PAO impartiality and independence, FedRAMP and A2LA monitor 3PAO status closely. Here we outline more details on the 3PAO as consultants versus assessors. A 3PAO can serve as both an assessor and as a consultant for a CSP pursuing a FedRAMP Ready designation. However, a 3PAO can never serve as an assessor immediately after serving as a consultant for a CSP. For example, if a CSP undergoes a readiness assessment and they are deemed not ready, the CSP may hire the same 3PAO party who did the assessment to serve as a consultant to help with the remediation of issues. However, after the issues are resolved, a different 3PAO must be hired to handle the next readiness assessment. In short, a 3PAO can never check their own work. A2LA monitors impartiality and independence very closely, and it is a core principle that the 3PAOs must maintain for FedRAMP. Additionally, a 3PAO must not assess a product in which they have a vested interest. And in order to maintain the independence of an assessment, 3PAOs are not permitted to perform assessment services for the same CSP that has directly utilized tools that are owned or developed by the 3PAO for any purpose. In scenarios where a tool being used for assessment services is owned or developed by a company with an affiliation to a 3PAO or its management team, employees, or subcontractors, the 3PAO must document the rationale for how it maintains its impartiality from the CSP. When the CSP is using the tool owned or developed by that entity affiliated with a 3PAO, It must document how it does not infringe upon the boundaries between providing consulting and assessing services to the CSP. This rationale must be approved by both A2LA and the FedRAMP PMO. The next important conversation with CSPs that we'll discuss is regarding FedRAMP ready status. The readiness assessment is to ensure that a CSP is ready to obtain a FedRAMP JAB or agency authorization by ensuring there are no major gaps in technical capabilities. Before the JAB can begin the authorization process with any CSP, a CSP must be deemed FedRAMP ready on the FedRAMP marketplace. So now we'll take a deeper look at the JAB authorization requirements. The guide for the prioritization process is available on the FedRAMP website under JAB prioritization criteria and FedRAMP Connect guidance. Being FedRAMP ready is heavily weighted prioritization criteria to work with the JAB towards a provisional authority to operate. Prioritization criteria includes 3 categories: demand, FedRAMP ready status, and preferred characteristics. At FedRAMP appointed times in the year, the vetted or prioritized CSPs must create a business case regarding how they meet these criteria and submit this business case within a specific time frame to the PMO. This is called FedRAMP Connect Business Case. If a CSP is chosen for the JAB authorization path, they must be FedRAMP ready within 60 days of their prioritization. 3 PAOs should advise their CSPs vying for prioritization to consider the criteria and the guidance to determine if the CSP could score well within the process. This is a significant amount of CSP, PMO, and JAB resources required to be considered for JAB authorization, so this process is not taken lightly. It is also important for 3 PAOs to emphasize the benefits of a FedRAMP ready determination with the CSP. Completing a readiness assessment on the path to becoming FedRAMP ready can provide insights into any gaps that may exist within their system. These gaps can often result in unforeseen costs and time for CSPs and 3 PAOs during the authorization process. A readiness assessment helps CSPs identify whether they have a high likelihood of success when attempting to achieve a FedRAMP authorization. Additionally, becoming FedRAMP ready makes available valuable information about a service offering security for potential agency customers via the FedRAMP marketplace. Agencies use the FedRAMP marketplace to research cloud services that meet their organizational requirements, and this can support them in pursuing government clients. Finally, it's important for CSPs to understand the FedRAMP ready status expiration. A cloud service offering's FedRAMP ready designation does expire and is only valid for 1 year, beginning on the date that the CSO was listed as FedRAMP ready on the FedRAMP marketplace. CSPs may choose to pursue the FedRAMP ready designation even prior to identifying an agency partner for an initial agency authorization or prior to being prioritized to work with the JAB. While a FedRAMP ready designation does provide marketplace visibility as well as additional benefits, it is important for a CSP to be aware of this associated time frame and limitation. After the CSO's 1-year anniversary date, the FedRAMP ready designation is automatically removed from the marketplace. The FedRAMP PMO sends an anniversary date reminder to the CSP 4 months prior to the anniversary date to remind the CSP of their upcoming marketplace delisting. If a CSP needs an additional or annual extension for being listed as FedRAMP ready on the marketplace, the CSP must work with a 3 PAO to complete a new RAR to remain FedRAMP ready for an additional year. The updated RAR must be submitted to the FedRAMP PMO prior to a CSO's anniversary date. Depending on the security state of the CSO may or may not be granted FedRAMP ready status for another year. Now we'll take a look at preparing a FedRAMP readiness assessment report. When a 3 PAO submits a RAR to FedRAMP, they are attesting to the CSP's readiness to meet the FedRAMP requirements as described within the report. The 3 PAO is recommending that the FedRAMP PMO grant the CSP FedRAMP ready status based on the CSP's security capabilities as of a specific completion date. This section will go into more detail regarding the preparation of this report. FedRAMP RAR templates are available for systems categorized at the high or moderate security impact level in accordance with the Federal Information Processing Standards Publication 199 Security Categorization. The high and moderate baselines follow the same steps for completion with additional substeps for the high baseline report. Let's take a look at some of the requirements within the RAR. The RAR must provide an overview of the system that includes a description of a clearly defined and maintainable authorization boundary, must provide a subjective summary of a CSO's overall readiness, including rationales such as notable strengths and other areas for consideration. It should provide an assessment of a CSO's ability to meet the federal mandates identified in Section 4.1, the federal FedRAMP requirements identified in Section 4.2, and additional capabilities identified in Section 4.3. It should provide a clear description and diagram of system components and services within the authorization boundary, as well as any connections to external systems and services that are outside of the authorization boundary. It should provide a clear data flow diagram and description that accounts for all federal information, data, and metadata, including all flows through the authorization boundary and to and from external services and systems, and all flows between systems within the authorization boundary. Please note for a RAR as well as a System Security Package or SSP, data flow diagrams should be consistent with the authorization boundary diagram. A 3PAO's attestation regarding the CSO's readiness to meet FedRAMP moderate baseline requirements within 1 year from the date of submission. The requirements are more rigorous for high baselines. Finally, for all RAR sections, it's important to be specific, clear, and succinct. The RAR template is primarily structured in a series of questions that cover key areas of concern to gauge readiness for moving towards FedRAMP authorization. The 3PAOs should directly and clearly answer RAR requirements and questions, stating what they found during the review and how they came about determining if a CSP adequately addresses the question area. The how is very important and should briefly describe the specific method of testing the 3PAO performed to draw conclusions about a CSP's CSO, security state, and control implementations. Now let's take a look at the differences between JAB and agency RARs. Although there are certain fundamental differences between these two, a RAR is always the 3PAO's responsibility. And if a system is truly FedRAMP ready, the RAR provides a full story of the system with no pieces missing. The PMO relies on the 3PAO's expertise to judge the readiness of a system. There are a few fundamental differences between JAB RARs and agency RARs, such as to enter into the JAB PATO process, CSPs must become FedRAMP ready. CSPs desiring agency ATO FedRAMP authorization, however, are not required to undergo a readiness assessment. Under most circumstances, the use of external services that lack FedRAMP agency ATO or JAB PATO is permitted only if pursuing agency authorization and if the partnering agency accepts risk. And finally, external services for use in systems pursuing a JAB PTAO should also have a JAB PATO at the same categorization level. Case-by-case approval is required for external services that do not have a JAB PATO. Now let's talk about some recurring issues that the PMO and the JAB frequently see in RARs. A 3PAO may not be adequately validating CSO boundaries. The PMO needs accurate authorization boundary diagrams, or ABDs, and data flow diagrams, or DFDs, and needs to understand the encryption status of all data flows and stores. A 3PAO that may not be using expert judgment to impartially evaluate the CSP's overall readiness to formulate attestation. A 3PAO may not recognize that the RAR is fully their responsibility. A 3PAO may be using interviews and CSP documentation only and not technical expertise. The PMO finds that the technical tests are not being performed. Technical means analyzing such things as discovery scans and system physical examinations or remote examinations. And finally, external services are not adequately represented or specified. If a 3PAO submits a RAR that is knowingly less than adequate, the PMO will bring this to the 3PAO's attention. Sometimes this can result in the 3PAO listed as in remediation on the marketplace. Now let's take a look at the high-level steps that it takes to adequately develop a RAR. There are 9 steps in total. First, step 1, validate the authorization boundary diagram. Step 2, identify all data flows and stores within and throughout the authorization boundary. Step 3, determine leveraged FedRAMP authorizations. Step 4, determine external and corporate systems and services connections. Step 5, determine application programming interfaces, or APIs. Step 6, assess and describe the strength of the physical and/or logical separation measures within the system. Step 7, ensure federal mandates are met. Step 8, assess security capability sections. Step 9, complete executive summary and sign the attestation. We'll take a deeper look at each of these steps in the following slides. The first step in preparing a RAR is for the 3PAO to perform a full authorization boundary validation to include encryption on all data flows and stores. This step is key. NIST Special Publication SP 800-37 Revision 2 defines an authorization boundary as all components of information system to be authorized for operation by an authorizing official and excludes separately authorized systems to which the information system is connected. And the NIST publication states that the authorization boundary establishes the scope of protection for an information system, that is, what the organization agrees to protect under its direct management or within the scope of its responsibilities. The authorization boundary includes the people, processes, and information technologies that are part of each system supporting the organization's missions and business functions. It is important to note that establishing meaningful authorization boundaries for systems and common controls is one of the most important risk management activities carried out by an organization. Establishment of meaningful authorization boundaries is a foundation for assuring mission and business success for the organization. So let's take a look at finding the right balance. Authorization boundaries that are too expansive, such as the ones that include too many system elements or components, make the risk management process unnecessarily complex. Conversely, authorization boundaries that are too limited, such as ones that include too few system elements or components, increase the number of systems that must be separately managed and may unnecessarily inflate the information security and privacy cost for the organization. The authorization boundary defines the specific scope of an authorizing official's responsibility and accountability for protecting information resources and individuals' privacy, including the use of systems, components, and services from external providers. We want to emphasize, before any cloud service offering can be assessed, the offering must have a clearly defined and maintainable authorization boundary. If a CSP has not yet defined the cloud system authorization boundary, a security assessment of any type should not be started, as there is no way a 3PAO can proceed with determining the proper security or risk posture of an offering that is not defined. Now we will take a look at key components of an authorization boundary diagram. A clearly defined high-resolution authorization boundary with a legend accounts for the flow and storage of all federal data or sensitive federal metadata. All external services that process, store, or transmit federal data or sensitive federal metadata must either be included in the authorization boundary or reside in a FedRAMP authorized system at the same FITS 199 impact level. An acceptable boundary diagram is a clearly marked boundary. For example, a labeled box or line around the components included. The diagram must be legible and readable. The diagram should include a clearly defined authorization boundary. It should include system interconnections used to operate and support the intended mission/business functions. It should depict every tool, service, or component that is mentioned in the SSP narrative and controls. Identify the depicted tools, services, or components as either external or internal to the boundary. It should identify all interconnected systems and whether they are FedRAMP authorized or not. It should also depict how CSP and customer or agencies access the service, for example, the authentication used to access. It should depict all major software or virtual components or groups of within the boundary. It should depict all components from the service offering that are necessary to run on the client side. It should be validated against the inventory. It should show alternate processing sites. And finally, it should show pulling of updates from external services, such as OS and antivirus updates. It is important to note that all supporting text should describe all internal components and be cohesive with the entire system. Validating a CSO authorization boundary is a critical step, and a 3PAO must ensure that boundary is accurate based on the FedRAMP requirements listed in the previous slides. So let's take a look at some key reminders discussed so far. First, 3PAOs must validate that the boundary is accurate, identifying both what is inside the boundary and outside the boundary. Nothing should be missing, and all included items are discussed as part of the system boundary. Second, many times a CSP may have several iterations before a diagram is FedRAMP acceptable. Third, a CSP can always utilize a FedRAMP-approved 3PAO to act as a consultant and guide them towards an acceptable boundary diagram. And finally, the assessing 3PAO cannot act as the consulting 3PAO because this violates the impartiality and independence upon which FedRAMP relies. Finally, we want to note that boundary inaccuracies within the RAR may give FedRAMP grounds for removing a vendor from assessment and authorization activities. Once the authorization boundary is defined, the next step is to identify all the data flows. Note that most times, CSPs elect to have one overarching system boundary and make it both the authorization boundary diagram and data flow diagram, and include the network components. This approach can eliminate the confusion caused by multiple diagrams, which can often leave room for error. This is wholly acceptable and ensures all components and lines of the diagram are aligned and consistent. Data flow elements should clearly identify everywhere federal data is to be processed, stored, or transmitted. It should clearly delineate how data comes into and out of the system boundary, clearly identify data flows for privileged, non-privileged, and customers' access with MFA details, and also should depict how all ports, protocols, and services of all inbound and outbound traffic are represented and managed. For each data flow, clearly depict protective mechanisms as FIPS 140 validation, non-FIPS 140 validation, or unencrypted. Identify the data flows and stores that are not encrypted. Describe the impacted data, such as government data, government metadata, or CSP data. Describe the sensitivity of the impact data, for example, low versus moderate. Describe any mitigations in place, and describe a remediation plan and projected date of remediation where appropriate. The network components reflected in the ABD, or Authorization Boundary Diagram, will also depict subnetting with components located within the subnets. It will depict location of DNS servers, including external authoritative servers used by customers to access the CSO, or internal recursive servers used to access domains outside the boundary. Note, both of these should support DNSSEC. If any data flows are not protected by encryption, the CSP should be prepared to provide the FedRAMP PMO clarifying details so that a risk decision can be made related to FedRAMP authorization. The CSP must be aware that encryption on all data flows and stores is required by federal law for federal data or sensitive federal metadata. Please refer to the FedRAMP Authorization Boundary Guidance document for more detail on data flow diagram requirements. Step 3 is to determine leveraged FedRAMP authorizations. If there is a FedRAMP leveraged cloud service offering, be sure to provide the specific details regarding this relationship in Table 3-1, called Leveraged FedRAMP Authorizations. The leveraged CSO must be listed on the FedRAMP marketplace with the status of authorized. A FedRAMP authorized CSO has submitted a full assessment package that has been accepted by the JAB or approved by the PMO. If a CSO is listed as in process on the FedRAMP marketplace, it has not been authorized and is considered as an external, non-authorized system for a CSO going through the RAR process. Here are a few key points to note when there's a leveraged CSO. First, a 3PAO must validate that all sub-services listed in Table 3-1 are included in the leveraged CSO's authorization boundary, per the CSO's service description on the FedRAMP marketplace. Services that are not included in a FedRAMP authorized boundary must be listed in another table for external systems and services, Table 3-2. Second, if the system is leveraging external services from a FedRAMP authorized system, the interfaces to the services must be included in the boundary and must also be assessed by the 3PAO. Third, the nature of agreement can be any type of agreement between the CSP and the CSP vendor who supports products. For example, EULA, SLA, app license agreement, and/or contract. Fourth, FedRAMP expects that all vendor products are kept current and patched. Fifth, a 3PAO should ensure that if they are assessing a SaaS, that subscriptions to underlying services are documented accurately, such as government community cloud versus commercial cloud or hybrid, or FedRAMP authorized versus not FedRAMP authorized. And finally, a 3PAO should validate that the CSP uses names for authorized external services from the FedRAMP marketplace. For example, when a CSO is leveraging AWS, it is specified as AWS GovCloud or Amazon US East/West. All the subservices and features must follow the naming convention on the marketplace. Make sure the CSP updates name to match current FedRAMP marketplace listings. The fourth step is to determine external and corporate system and service connections. FedRAMP defines a connection as any communication path used to push, pull, or exchange data and/or information, including application programming interfaces, or APIs. FedRAMP encourages the use of FedRAMP authorized services as connections where possible. The RAR must specify all connected, external, and leveraged services. The CSP often establishes connections to external systems and services, to 1, exchange data and information, or 2, augment system functionality and operational support services. This includes corporate systems and services that are not part of the authorization boundary. FedRAMP does not consider cloud systems and services as corporate systems and services. These are external services since these are not under the complete control of the corporate entity. In most cases, corporate is also in the cloud. A 3PAO must report the use of third-party providers and external services or systems lacking FedRAMP authorization. At the time of the RAR completion, a 3PAO completes Table 3-2 to provide a mini-analysis of the RAR external leverage services and associated risk. A 3PAO utilizes their expertise to determine residual risk posed to the potential agency customer for using these external services and systems. Agencies may choose to use cloud services that lack FedRAMP authorization per their own risk tolerance levels. Agencies must understand the use of services that has not been FedRAMP authorized, represent unknown risk, and have not been validated by a 3PAO. Agencies must also understand how their data is interacting with such services, and must assess and accept risks for use of these external services, especially those services that provide critical security functionality. Agencies are encouraged to engage the CSP about questions concerning use of external services and may involve the FedRAMP PMO in such discussions as desired. Next, let's take a look at determining application program interfaces, or APIs. APIs are a set of definitions and protocols for building and integrating application software. For any service, APIs allow the CSO product or service to communicate with other products and services without having to know how they're implemented. APIs let the CSO access resources while maintaining security and control. API security is maintained by API management and includes the use of an API gateway. The RAR should address private, public, and partner release policies. A private release policy means the API is only for use internally. This gives the CSP the most control over the API. A public release indicates that the API is available to everyone. This allows third-party external services to develop apps that interact with CSP's API. And third, the partner policy means the API is shared with specific business partners. This provides the CSP with a broad reach through other partners without compromising API quality. There are 3 types of APIs currently available that we see. First, Simple Object Access Protocol, also known as SOAP. APIs designed with SOAP use XML for their message format and receive requests through HTTP or SMTP. SOAP makes it easier for apps running in different environments or written in different languages to share information. FedRAMP tends to see SOAP APIs for privacy-related information since these must be managed and monitored closely. Second, Representational State Transfer, also known as REST or RESTful APIs. REST differs from SOAP in a fundamental way. SOAP is a protocol, whereas REST is an architectural style. This means that there is no official standard for RESTful web APIs. APIs are RESTful as long as they comply with basic guiding constraints of a RESTful system. And the third API standard that has shown up in recent years is GraphQL, a query language and server-side runtime that is an alternate to REST. GraphQL provides and prioritizes giving clients exactly the data the client requests and nothing more. As an alternate to REST, GraphQL lets developers construct requests that pull data from multiple data sources in a single API call. Note that microservices are not APIs. Microservices is an architecture that currently uses remote APIs. Microservices are a set of discrete services, a lightweight architecture, that are loosely coupled but use a common messaging framework, such as a RESTful API. FedRAMP does not yet require that the 3PAO differentiate the specific microservices available within the system. The 6th step involves assessment and description of the strength of the physical and/or logical separation measures within the system. As cloud computing evolves, there is no real need for physical separation of customer data and resources. That is, as long as the CSO has built and maintained secure virtualization, has FIPS 140 validated crypto modules in the encryption for all government data flows and stores, and has restricted programmatic policies. It then becomes the agency customer's responsibility to ensure they understand the tools and resources so they can provide control over data flows and stores. Physical and/or logical separation measures within the system must form defense in depth. Adequate separation measures provide segmentation and isolation of tenants, administration, and operations, and addresses user-to-system, admin-to-system, and system-to-system relationships. Most current CSOs use isolation as physical and logical separation. For example, identity and access management ensures that only authenticated individuals with the right to know have access to specific resources. Monitoring, logging, and auditing the system automatically provides records of all required activities and all configuration changes, includes API logging and monitoring. Isolation of traffic flows into and out of the CSO to prevent data leakage and access across tenants, and resource access isolation of all operations across tenants. Virtual private cloud architectures, virtual networks, and subnets for isolation of memory, devices, networking, and managed resources. FIPS 140 validated crypto modules, which are supposed to be used for all encryption of all data at rest and data in transit with strong encryption key management. And the option for host or instance isolations for provisioning and dedicated hypervisor-enabled or bare metal architecture to maintain customer data on a physical compute host is not shared with others. serverless and container architectures for isolated execution environments. A 3PAO must base the assessment of separation measures on very strong evidence, such as the review of any existing penetration testing results or an expert review of the products, architectures, and configurations involved. No explicit penetration test is required. However, if a CSP has one, either done by themselves or a third party, it is recommended that it be reviewed. If no penetration test is available, a 3PAO must be able to provide a rationale for being able to prove that there is adequate segregation of tenants and data. Additionally, 3PAOs must analyze all border devices to ensure they provide appropriate segregation from other systems. This includes examination of all configurations. A 3PAO must describe the methods used to verify the strength of separation measures and segmentation and isolation of tenant data flows and stores in the RAR. Step 7 is to ensure that federal mandates are met. There are 6 federal mandates for both moderate and high baseline systems. Before RAR is submitted, the following should be true. First, FIPS 140 validated cryptographic modules are consistently used everywhere cryptography is required. This includes all required encryption. This means all government data flows and stores, internally, externally, and traversing through the system boundary. Second, the system fully supports user authentication via agency common access card or personal identity verification credentials. Third, the system is operating at minimally digital identity level 2 for a moderate system and minimally level 3 for a high system. Fourth, the CSP has the ability to consistently remediate high vulnerabilities within 30 days, moderate vulnerabilities within 90 days, and low vulnerabilities within 180 days. Fifth, the CSP and system meet federal records management requirements, including the ability to support record holds, National Archives and Record Administration requirements, and Freedom of Information Act requirements. And lastly, the system's external DNS solution supports DNS security extensions to provide origin authentication and integrity verification assurances. RARs do not have POAM items and do not have authorizing official concurrence on the acceptance of risk. While there are degrees of implementation with the CSO's capabilities, these 6 items must be met when the RAR is submitted. Step 8 in preparing a FedRAMP Readiness Assessment Report is to assess security capability sections. The 3PAO is to assess the minimal number of technical security controls that must be in place before the system is deemed FedRAMP ready. There are approximately 20 security control families that must be addressed during a full assessment based on the criticality of the system. However, for both a moderate and high RAR, the 3PAO checks specific attributes associated with the following control families: identification, authentication, and access control. For this family, the 3PAO must determine if the system adheres to current digital identity level requirements for identification, authentication, and access controls in accordance with NIST Special Publication 800-63 Revision 3. Audit, alerting, malware, and incident response. The 3PAO must determine if the CSO has consistent audit, alerting, malware, and incident response controls in place. Particularly for this set of capabilities, the CSO should have an incident response test plan at least drafted. Contingency planning and disaster recovery. No system in any part of the system development lifecycle is worth much if the system cannot be restored minimally to the state that it was prior to an exploit. The 3PAO has to use expertise to judge if the system has consistent contingency planning and disaster recovery controls in place. Configuration and risk management. The 3PAO is attesting that the CSO does demonstrate consistent configuration and risk management controls. Specifically, scans are authenticated and performed monthly on OS or infrastructure and web and database applications as applicable. Also, all vulnerabilities must be remediated within the FedRAMP required timeframes of 30, 60, or 90 days for high, moderate, and low baselines. Data center security. For all high baseline RARs, the 3PAO attests that the CSP restricts the location of data processing and storage to U.S. or U.S. territories or geographic locations where there is U.S. jurisdiction. Also, the 3PAO attests that the CSP restricts, monitors, and logs physical access to the information system and maintains access records in addition to monitoring and responding to physical intrusion alarms and surveillance equipment. Change management capabilities. For this control family, the CSP must maintain a current, complete, and accurate baseline configuration of the information system, have a formal configuration management process, and a formal change control process. Continuous monitoring capabilities. The 3PAO validates and attests that the CSP properly maintains their Plan of Actions and Milestones, or POEM, including timely, accurate, and complete information entries for new scan findings, vendor check-ins, and closure of POEM items. Finally, it is important to note that the CSP must have the majority of the policies and procedures documented. When the PMO reviews the RAR for adequacy, the capabilities section should not be a copy and paste from the SSP, and a 3PAO should provide expert analysis to determine the adequacy of the security in place. The PMO does emphasize the importance of continuous monitoring throughout the system development lifecycle. Therefore, the CSP must be performing scanning and remediation in a FedRAMP timely manner. The 3PAO should be able to observe vulnerability scan findings from at least 3 months of scanning to determine if continuous monitoring is in place. We have already stated the importance of the technical capabilities that must be in place for a cloud service offering to be considered as FedRAMP ready. Having technical capabilities in place does not necessarily mean that all processes are documented adequately. Step 8A is to ensure technical controls are implemented and operating as intended. Here are a few key points to keep in mind. The intent of the readiness assessment is to examine and document a CSP's real-time operations. CSPs should not author the document. Data center visits are not mandatory unless the 3PAO has no idea about the data center. If the 3PAO chooses to forego the data center visit, the 3PAO must be able to state that they believe the data center is of no major concern to the security of the cloud service offering. FedRAMP relies on the technical expertise of each 3PAO. The 3PAO must be able to attest that the system is fully operational and is FedRAMP ready. Fully operational means that the architectural components of the system are all in place and operating as required, and technical controls are implemented. We realize that many times a system is fully operational, but the documentation regarding the technical implementations of the capabilities is poor. Documentation can be updated on an ongoing basis. It is rare for a CSO to remain in stasis given the very nature of cloud computing. Step 8B is to ensure that each security control capability statement includes a 3PAO test methodology. Recording the 3PAO's testimony for the capabilities section seems to be problematic for many 3PAOs. Atop each of the tables for each of the capabilities sections in the third column is the following direction: describe capability, supporting evidence, and any missing elements. The best way that we have seen the capabilities addressed is by breaking each capability cell in the table into 3 sections. The first section should be capability, or C. The second section should be supporting evidence, or SE. And the third section, missing elements, or ME. As the 3PAO answers each capability, they must turn the question into a statement, then explain the how. For instance, one of the capabilities questions is, does the system protect audit information from unauthorized access, modification, and deletion? In order to answer this appropriately in the capability, or C column, the 3PAO would turn the question into a statement such as, the system does protect audit information from unauthorized access, modification, and deletion. But then the next few sentences should explain how this is accomplished. Then under the supporting evidence, or SE, portion of the cell, The 3PAO lists the artifacts of the testing that occurred. Under the Missing Elements, or ME section, the 3PAO should explain if anything required in this capability is missing. For instance, this question asks for unauthorized access, unauthorized modification, and unauthorized deletion. If a 3PAO determined that the CSO has not yet figured out unauthorized access to the audit logs, then the chances are pretty good that the unauthorized modification and unauthorized deletion are not yet determined either. In a case such as this, the capability question is marked as no. The 3PAO then describes in Missing Elements the root cause of this capability not being in place. Each security control capability in the RAR must go through this type of discerning process in order for the RAR to make sense and tell the whole story. Keep in mind that the missing elements in one section may naturally affect other capabilities listed. The 3PAO should be observing the system holistically and as the sum of its parts. Let's take a look at the final step for preparing a FedRAMP RAR. Step 9 is to complete an executive summary and sign the attestation. The RAR executive summary is the CSO's resume for prospective agency customers. The executive summary must be exact, concise, and easily understood. The FedRAMP PMO recommends beginning the executive summary just as you would prepare a white paper, using the RAR prescribed subsection headers that correspond with the bullets that the 3POs are specifically asked to address in the RAR's executive summary. Then, carefully proceed through each bulleted item and describe how the 3PO developed the noted observation. In the executive summary, at a minimum, 3PAOs must describe the following: the overall alignment with the NIST definition of cloud computing according to NIST SP 800-145, including the requirement for CSP to have a self-service portal, whether the CSP is pursuing a JAB PATO or an agency ATO, notable strengths and weaknesses, ability to consistently maintain a clearly defined system boundary, ability to accurately describe intra- and inter-system user and sensitive metadata data flow, risk associated with the interconnections used to transmit federal data or metadata or sensitive system data or metadata, risk associated with the use of external systems and services that are not FedRAMP authorized, clearly defined customer responsibilities, unique or alternative implementations, overall maturity level relative to the system type, size, and complexity, and finally, overall operational maturity relative to how long the system and required security controls have been in operation. Now we will cover the RAR submission instructions. A 3PO should not submit a RAR unless the following has been done. 1. Fully validated the CSO authorization boundary and data flow diagrams. 2. Validated that the CSP has implemented all federal mandates. And 3. Validated that there are no major technical gaps between the CSP's implemented technical controls and FedRAMP requirements. A RAR must provide the following: an overview of the system, a subjective summary of the CSP's overall readiness, including rationales such as notable strengths and other areas for consideration, an assessment of a CSP's ability to meet the federal mandates identified in Section 4.1, the FedRAMP requirements identified in Section 4.2, and additional capabilities identified in Section 4.3 of the RAR, a clear description and diagram of system components and services within the authorization boundary, as well as all connections to external systems and services that are outside of the authorization boundary, a clear data flow diagram and description that accounts for all inter and intra-boundary flow of federal information, data, and metadata. This includes all flows through the authorization boundary and to and from external systems and services, and all flows between systems within the authorization boundary. And finally, a 3PAO's attestation regarding a CSP's FedRAMP readiness. So what's next? All 3PAOs have a space created in the FedRAMP Secure Repository, also known as MAX, for them to upload completed moderate RARs. 3PAOs should confer with their CSP concerning the results of their readiness assessment before posting the RAR, but only 3PAOs not CSPs, should upload RARs to MACs in order to maintain a chain of custody. In order to help the FedRAMP PMO gauge work and potential reviews, please notify the FedRAMP PMO via info@fedramp.gov of any engagements you have with CSPs for readiness assessments at least 2 weeks prior to submission. When the FedRAMP PMO receives the submission, it is put in a review queue. If the queue is extensive, the FedRAMP PMO will send the CSP and 3PAO an email to set expectations regarding approximate review timeframes. This timeframe is based on the estimated time it will take the FedRAMP PMO to begin the review of the RAR and does not reflect the time it will take the PMO to complete the review. Next, the FedRAMP director will make a determination of FedRAMP readiness based on the RAR, whether the cloud service offering is suitable for a FedRAMP JAB provisional ATO and/or a FedRAMP agency ATO. The FedRAMP director will provide a letter to the CSP that outlines the results of the review and JAB PATO or agency ATO suitability. Finally, it is important to remember that the 3PAO, not the CSP, must coordinate with the FedRAMP PMO. Now let's review some key takeaways. As a recap to the course material, let's review these key takeaways. There are no shortcuts for the RAR process. Residual risk is either acceptable or unacceptable. The 3PAO should not submit a RAR if the 3PAO is aware that the CSO is not FedRAMP ready. RAR creation is an art and a science. Attention to detail is required. 3PAOs should not submit a RAR to FedRAMP unless they validate that all federal mandates mentioned in Section 4.1 are met, and believe a CSO has the necessary security capabilities and functionalities to obtain FedRAMP authorization. A2LA monitors 3PAO impartiality and independence very closely, a core 3PAO principle that 3PAOs must maintain for FedRAMP. FedRAMP Ready designation provides marketplace visibility and other benefits. The CSP must be aware of the 1-year associated time limitation. If the 3PAO does not agree with the security posture of the system, the 3PAO should not complete the attestation statement or submit the RAR. Moderate or high RARs will take much longer if the CSP is not truly ready. CSPs are encouraged to use a RAR template to self-assess and determine the gaps. A 3PAO consultant can assist. RAR submission does not guarantee a FedRAMP Ready designation, nor does it guarantee a FedRAMP authorization. This concludes the FedRAMP training on the Readiness Assessment Report. Thank you for spending time with us today, and feel free to learn more on our website at fedramp.gov or contact us directly at info@fedramp.gov. You can also connect with us through our Twitter account @FedRAMP or by subscribing to our PMO newsletter. These are all ways that you can learn more about updates and announcements, including new guidance and new information available as far as training and resources to our stakeholders. Thank you.